Hello, welcome to Crossing Cultures one more week with Cristina Luna. How are you all today? I am so excited to introduce you to my new guest today, Paula. Paula, how are you?
I'm great, having a good day. Little dreary here in New Jersey, but we're getting through.
You're
So,
getting,
looking forward to the spring.
we're looking forward to the spring too here. I wanted to have Paula in the show because she was recommended by a friend of mine, and he says Paula is super interesting. She has worked with bands to the 80s. She has gone through all the changes in the 70s too. And she is a person that has been in contact with many cultures. So I said, let's do it, Paula. So thank you for being with us. We had different chats. And I would love you to take us through how it was, growing up with parents from different cultures of the world, both were are American, right? And you growing up in a little town in New Jersey, the impact of New York City, working for bands, and then all the changes you have, married, two kids. What are the limitations and the freedoms and everything? So let's go backwards to those times, right? The times of big changes, the 60s and the 70s. And let's not forget the fashion,
Yeah, the fashion.
right?
Talk about extreme changes over time.
Yeah. So tell us about you. Like you were born in a little town in New Jersey, right? In the
Correct.
late 50s.
Yes,
So you were born and grew up in all that exciting area, 60s, 70s, 80s, when all the changes happened, liberation, freedom, limitation, right?
absolutely. There was such a big change, especially I'm going to say going into my teenage years, which is probably the worst time to go through changes because all of a sudden all of those norms of the American household and the American family were sort of thrown out the window. And so it went from my parents saying to me, if you are going to see a boy, he's going to have to come and meet the family and come into the house and pick you up and take you out and then bring you home at a certain time. And then I'm going to say within 3 years' time, I would say to my mother, I'm leaving for the weekend in a van full of people you've never seen or heard of before to go off to a musical festival, and I'll be back in maybe 3 or 4 days. So there was a lot of freedom, and I think a lot of that freedom was starting to be given to people of my age group, a little bit older, somewhat a little bit younger, but mainly older because of the inception of the Vietnam War and people getting drafted and going off to war. So suddenly it was people who were not really old enough to drink alcohol or vote in this country,
Mm-hmm.
barely old enough to drive, and they were getting drafted to go off to fight in a foreign country that they knew nothing about, with a war that they had no idea of why we were there. It wasn't like our country had been attacked like it was in World War II. And there was a lot of strife between the generations of the people who were from that era of World War II, the Depression and World War II, and fighting for our country and being very patriotic. And then an entire generation below them, their children, were protesting the war, throwing away all of their values, angry, frightened. So I think they started giving more leeway to people because they said, how could we send someone off to a war when they're not even allowed to vote for the people who are sending them there? So it was kind of I wouldn't say like a full on revolution, but there was definitely a huge cultural revolution and social revolution. Also, to bring in another point, it went from very, what's the word I'm looking for, sort of prim and proper sexuality, and no one could be gay. There was no such thing until birth control was brought in. And when birth control was becoming legal, the pill, everyone started feeling freer with what they were doing socially. So that was a huge change. And in the midst of it all, I think everything that was going on at that time was reflected in the movies, in music, definitely, and in literature all across the board. there was just, they said like there's a different song in the air now.
Yeah. How did that affected you, all these changes in your life with your parents? I know that we're going to go back to your childhood, right? Your parents,
Yeah,
one very conservative from West Virginia, your mom, your father from Italian background.
right.
That's a very,
And
that's a clash by itself.
yeah, I was the only daughter of four children, three
Oh my
boys and
God.
myself. So my father,
My God.
yeah. So my mom was from down south in West Virginia, very strict upbringing, Baptist church every Sunday. Women did not. My grandmother, I never saw my grandmother not in a dress.
Wow.
Even though they were farm people, in the farm, she would have her long dresses on and go out to milk the cows and whatever. I never saw my grandmother not in a dress. Everyone at that time, the women were not allowed to smoke cigarettes, to drink alcohol. I would say to my mother, "Oh, did you go to dances when you were kids?" And she said, "No, we weren't allowed to dance." That was like very brazen for a woman to be like that. My father's family from Italy, and my father was one of the younger ones of 9 children, and a big, gregarious, loving, crazy Italian family with that whole European, more the merrier. Everyone is welcome. And so, yeah, my mom happened to come up here when she was about 15 years old from West Virginia to New Jersey to help out an aunt who had a husband who was away. And she was helping my aunt raise her 2 boys. So that's how my mom ended up meeting my dad. Otherwise, that never would have happened, and I wouldn't have been here. But it was extremely, extremely different cultures, to the point where my mother, by the way, told my grandfather and mother that she had gotten married to someone. They had never met him because it was back in the days, I don't even know if my grandparents had a telephone in their house, because it was that long ago in the 40s, and they were in rural West Virginia in the middle of nowhere. So that's how she let my grandparents know that she was married.
So she was afraid they would let her marry to this gregarious
Exactly.
Italian man, right?
They did not understand it one bit. They did not understand it. They didn't know what an Italian person was like. My grandfather wrote to a friend of his that was from this area, asking him to go check out my dad, like as if it would have mattered at that point. It was too late.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's like another world. To this day, it's so isolated where my mother is from that it's very much like another world. I actually looked on one of their Facebook pages the other day, and the news in the county where my mom is that there were cows loose. Everyone watch out, there's cows loose from a meadow. And it's so different. Now here I am, literally 10 minutes out of sight of New York City, which is, that world of craziness and so many people and so much going on. And then on the other side of it, it was quiet, and you walk outside at night and there's no street lights, and there's, just a million stars in the sky. It's that isolated.
How did it work out with your parents, like their marriage being from such different upbringings? And how did they raise you, especially you, the girl? Who won, the Italian culture or the rural
The
West
Italian
Virginia?
culture definitely won, and I will tell you why. Because we were, obviously, my father's family was Roman Catholic. And in order back then for my mother to marry him, she had to convert to Catholicism. She had to be baptized, receive her communion, have confirmation, all before she could marry my father. And even then, because she wasn't born into the Catholic religion, they were only allowed to get married in the rectory of the church. She was not allowed to be married on the altar of the church at a Holy Family Church in Nutley, New Jersey. And my mother, not unlike many people who have been converted to another religion.
What was her religion?
She was Baptist, Southern Baptist.
And her parents approved it finally. An Italian, they didn't know, I'm from another religion.
Yeah, they did not know. They did not even understand it, because their church is very again, a Southern Baptist church. There's a lot of talking, there's a lot of singing. It's all based on the Bible. There's no saints. There's no Blessed Virgin Mary, any of that. There's none of that. It's very Bible based. And my mother's church, obviously, is what the Catholic Church is. And my mother said when she first went there, she didn't really understand a lot of it. She said she just thought it was a lot of like standing up and sitting down and kneeling, and then standing up and sitting down and kneeling, until she understood it. And then she became the most devoted Catholic person I've ever known in my life.
So that was a religion for her, really.
She embraced it wholeheartedly, to the point of she died 3 years ago at 97 years old with her rosary beads in her hand.
Wow. And what about raising you up? Like, how did she embrace the Italian family that she married to?
Well, she married my dad, and because it was during the war, they were going to ship my father out. He was in the army. So they got married. He left 3 days later to go overseas. She was only 17 years old, which to me is mind-blowing to get married at 17, but it was common, I guess, back then. My uncle, who she was staying with, actually went down and sort of lied and told them that she was 18 and she wasn't going to be 18 for 3 more months. So he gave permission for them to get married. So she was almost like a child herself when she was taken into my dad's family. He was away. All the older sisters taught her how to cook, taught her all the cultural, nuances of being Italian. And it would be very funny because my mom had a Southern accent, but sometimes she would swear in Italian.
With a Southern accent.
So instead of when somebody would say, Madonna me, my mother would say, Madonna me. But with a very Southern twang to her. And I was like, Mom, that doesn't even work. That doesn't even faze anybody when you say, we're not even listening to you at this point.
How did your mother's upbringing and your father's Italian, also your mother embraced it, impacted you growing up? And did you learn a language? What did you take from both cultures?
I didn't love the Southern culture because I was raised up here in New Jersey. When I went down there, I was shocked that, again, my mother would say, well, it's Easter Sunday and we're in West Virginia, so you're going to go to church. And I would go to church and I'm like, these people are just talking. We weren't, you would go into church, in Catholic church, you couldn't talk, and it was Easter and they were giving people candy in the church. And I thought, oh my goodness, I would never, you couldn't even chew gum, you would be fasting before you received communion. I was completely shocked by it. But I will tell you this, the similarities that I saw is that both of those cultures were very family oriented and community oriented. In other words, if someone had a problem, that they had an issue on their farm, all the people in the valley, if someone had passed away, everyone there would come and bring food to the house. And same thing in the Italian culture. As soon as somebody had a crisis, everyone would show up at the house with food or whatever. So I think different types of food, obviously. My father's family's food, the Italian culture was all based on Italian food, and the people down south, it was all based on ham and eggs and whatever was indigenous to that area there. My mother told me that she had never seen a citrus fruit, an orange, until she was 12 years old, and someone was passing through where her farm was, because they only ate what they grew, and they don't grow oranges in West Virginia.
That makes sense, right? Now let's go back, you're a teenager, and suddenly how the impact of the cultures, of the limitations that you had growing up, Catholic upbringing, and then the freedom that appeared in the 70s. How did you deal with both of that, and how did your family handle it with the only girl?
Well, I probably didn't deal with it as I should have, which is I went completely wild. I think the thing that probably saved me and grounded me in some ways is my love for music and how I was exposed to, all I ever wanted to do was be in the music industry.
Because your profession was mainly in the music industry, and it still is, right?
Yes,
Like
yes,
a sound engineer.
yes. I'm an audio engineer. And I had an older brother who was 10 years older than me. So he was a musician and he also was a technician. He would work for other bands when he wasn't playing. So one of the bands that he worked with was Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Who doesn't know that? I love that.
Okay, so because he was 10 years older than me, and the second one was irresponsible, my second brother was totally irresponsible. My oldest brother, Don, was just stuck with me all the time. They would be like, watch Paula, take care of her. We're doing something. So I sort of became almost like a younger sister slash daughter to him. I'm sure he did not love it either. But when other kids were going off to summer camps and what, I was with my brother on the road with Earth, Wind, and Fire. And I was like 16 years old, 15, 16 years old. So because he was the keyboard tech for them.
And your parents were okay?
You know, I think my parents were so overwhelmed at that point in time that they just sort of assumed that my brother was vigilantly watching and protecting me. And of course he wasn't, but
In their mind is one less to worry about.
exactly. It was just, you know, and I have a younger brother who was, as they would say, a handful. He was very, very crazy, always into something. My parents were just overwhelmed with him a lot. So I was, you know, the middle child. I had to do something that wasn't normal. And that's how I got into the music business. As soon as he would leave the house, he would say, please don't touch any of my equipment. Don't touch any of the band's equipment down in the rehearsal room. And as soon as he was out that door, I was down there, 11, 12 years old, turning on all the amplifiers, turning on the keyboards, trying different sounds, trying different microphones and like talking into them and trying them with echo and then without echo. And he would come in and catch me all the time, by the way. But I guess he felt like he had to say something. And then I just really ended up following that. I didn't really care about the usual things that people did in high school. I was more into trying to keep my parents at bay because even up until, I'm telling you, the point where not long before my mother passed away, she said to me, what are you doing this weekend? And I said, well, I have a sound gig at such and such a club. And she rolled her eyes and she said, you're still doing that? Like as if it was a phase that I was going through.
It never ended. It never
I'm
ended.
like, Mom, this is what I do for a living. It's what I've done for like decades now. And she would say to me at Christmas, what did you get for Christmas? And I'd say, well, I asked them, I needed some microphone stands and some, you know, mic cables and things. And my mom would say, wouldn't you just like a nice robe or a sweater or something? Because I was her only daughter and she was very much from a place where girls were very girly. And my mother was also an amazing seamstress and she used to make me these beautiful outfits and every dress, my wedding gown, everything. I mean, she was, you know, and she tried so hard to dress me in pink.
That you don't never dressed up in pink, I can gather.
No, and I told her, I said, honestly, I said, I am never going to wear pink when you're not here. I'm just never going to wear that. And people used to tease me about it because she just, you know, wanted a little girl for so long and finally got one. And she shouldn't have thrown those boys into the mix because I turned out to be kind of a tomboy. I didn't want to be the cheerleader. I wanted to play in the baseball game. So I sort of learned to do things the way I wanted to do it. But my father was very old school Italian, you know, raised in that very tight-knit Italian. I don't think my grandmother ever even renounced her. I don't even think she ever became naturalized as a citizen in the United States. My grandfather had to because he was working for the township of Nutley. But my grandmother was a mom. You know, she was the housewife. She was the matriarch of the family. So I don't, you know, and my dad just couldn't understand what was going on. He saw older female cousins of mine grow up and become the teachers and the secretaries and the mothers and the nurses and things like that. He would come to a concert that I was working at, and he would look and he'd be like, I don't even know what she's doing there. Like, he would look at my big soundboard with all of my equipment and stuff, and he's like, yeah, I don't really understand. I get there's people on stage playing music. I don't know what she is doing down there in the audience, in the crowd with her equipment. But to their credit, I don't know if they just finally gave in or gave up.
Well, the
So,
times changed a lot too. It was not only you being wild like in the 50s, right? When it was the 70s, 80s, the 80s,
yeah, I
many
mean,
changes had happened. So you had to adjust no matter what, or your kids would make you adjust.
exactly. And that's I said, I don't know if they just gave in or they gave up. They just said, like, we can't fight it anymore.
But you have a very unique stories, I'm sure, because you didn't have the conservative or the correct profession that girls would have. You went with all these wild bands that are like in the 70s, 80s. Tell us about some stories behind the scenes, the wilderness, the bands things that we normal people don't know about and you would only know from the inside.
Well, I have to tell you, there's a lot to be said. So you've probably heard of the band, The Police.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So there is a strange New Jersey police connection, believe it or not, because they came here to this country. Their road manager quit and went back to England, and they kind of gathered some people in our area to be, their sound engineers, to build equipment for them and whatnot. So it was interesting because they came here with nothing. And when I say with nothing, no one had heard of them. And even in England, nobody had heard of them. Like, they had heard of them, but no one really liked them. They thought they were sort of like posers, that they were trying to come off as a punk band, which was huge at the time. But as you know, Sting is definitely more of a, jazz, popular, musical guy. And the drummer was very classically oriented and also grew up in the Middle East. So he had like a different percussion feel. And their guitar player was studied at the Royal Academy of Music, the guitarist, and they just hit at the right time. So at the time, no one would take a woman seriously as a sound engineer. It just wasn't done. To this day, if you say to people, who is the person who, do you know any female sound engineers? They will say my name. Not because I'm the best, just because I'm the only one who's a female and still doing it. So what I was allowed to do was work on the lighting crew, which now lighting is almost robotic and automatic. But at the time, you had to manually change the lights. So you had to know all the cues for the songs and when someone was going to take a guitar solo and when somebody was going to step up to the microphone and sing, and the spotlight had to be on them and the colors had to change and what. So that was my indoctrination into the music business. It was just a fluke, basically, by default, that they were like, well, we need somebody. I guess you can do it, kind of thing.
How did he treated you, like being like kind of the only woman doing this kind of job? And how did you live? And what are some of the wild stories behind the scenes that, the outside world wouldn't know about?
Well,
The groupies, the way also the young people respond, then versus how they respond today, all of that.
Well, people tried to, especially women, tried to befriend me a lot because they thought that was a way for them to connect with the people in the band. And I tried not to get in the middle of things, but I have to tell you, there's more than one time that I had to run into a dressing room and tell someone, get her out of here, your wife is outside.
Wow.
So more than once with many people. Same thing with, the drug culture that went along with it because, in the 80s, everybody was doing cocaine, just everyone. And it would not be unusual for someone to walk in with a bag of Coke, and I turned into the mom. I turned into, oh no, no, we're not doing this. We have to get on that stage right now. So
Keep it for afterwards, right?
yeah, exactly. And believe me, there was plenty afterwards. At one point, one of the bands that I worked for, their cocaine dealer who came to every show was also John Belushi's cocaine dealer. Every once in a while, John would show up at one of the shows with him, and it wasn't that long into that whole period that John Belushi ended up passing away with his drug overdose. But yeah, and you know, our nights at Studio 54, that was a whole other thing. You know, when we got into the 80s, Studio 54 was completely insane. I mean, you would come out and the sun would be coming up. And
it was such as fun and kind of wild as
it was wild. And, you know,
shows on some documentaries and movies.
It felt like the world was never going to end and there was never going to be any repercussions from our behavior, you know. And then as time went on, you saw people starting to lose their families because of their ways, their habits, or people losing their businesses because they spent too much money on drugs and partying. So at the end of the day, I think like the people who are still standing are the people that sort of, even if they dabbled in it at one point, sort of their focus was always more about making the music. You know, I have two boys, one who is a drummer, which I was on tour with Al Jarreau. I don't know if you know who he is, but he was a very famous sort of jazz pop singer. He did the theme music for that show Moonlighting, and he had several hits, but he wasn't like a mainstream rock and roll guy. And I was pregnant with my first son, very pregnant with him, at a show at Radio City, and every time the percussion player would hit a conga drum, the baby would jump and jump to the point where you could actually see my stomach moving. And somebody came over to the side of the stage and he said to me, "I think you have a drummer in there." And I said to him, over my dead body, there will not be a drummer in my family.
And it did happen.
Oh, yeah. He was all-state drummer by the time he was 18 years old. And now he plays in a band with his father. So that didn't work out well. But, you know, my youngest son had no interest and thought we were all crazy in the music industry. And in
the balance.
Yeah.
Balance the family.
Yes. And around fourth grade, he said to me, he came home from school one day and he said to me, "I'm taking the flute. I'm going to learn flute in school." And I said to him, "Justin, why would you take the flute?" And he said, "Well, I see Dad, my husband is a keyboard player, had huge keyboards to take everywhere, packed in road cases and whatnot, with all of his equipment. And I see Michael, John, that's my oldest son, with all of those drums." And he held up a flute and he said to me, "This fits in my backpack." And he said, "And it's me and 8 girls in that section of the orchestra. Just me and 8 girls."
Smart boy.
My husband looked at me and he said, "Well," he goes, "that's why they get into business, to meet the girls."
So you had a wild, life growing up with the music business and the changes of the eras. And then you had a conservative kind of, you chose to live where you were born or around that area and get married, have kids. Like, what happened? Do you have any regrets? Did you balance? What made you choose one life versus the other? Because they were completely opposite.
Completely opposite. And it was such a struggle to balance that, because I would say, okay, I have my choice. I go into the city and do a show with the band, or my youngest has his spring recital, you know, to sing with the kids in the school or do the Christmas concert or whatever. But I have to tell you, I do not take lightly the fact that I am here by the grace of God and fate, because so many things could have happened. We were in so many crazy and dangerous sometimes situations. It's amazing to me, and we all say it all the time, all the people in my age, we can't believe we're alive. Not only did we grow up with parents who never knew where we would just go out the door and play, but we also ended up you know, there were no seat belts. Nobody like checked on anything. There was no safety measures. My kids, because of that, I was so vigilant with them that my oldest actually said to me, he goes, will I be allowed to cross the street at some point in my life? And he was 10 years old. And I said, I'm going to watch you. My parents didn't know the difference. We would leave that out of the house on a Saturday morning, and my mother would say, come home when the street lights come on. That was all we had to do. Come home, eat our lunch, and then be back in when the street lights were on. And because of that, I felt like I needed to be that extra protective and involved mother. My parents never came to school for anything. They would come if we had like a school play or something. I became the president of the PTA, was at meetings every month, had, all of the committees. I was so involved in my kids' lives, and I just probably went to the other extreme.
How did you feel about that extreme? Do you have any regrets, or are you happy with the choices you made?
No, I do have some regrets, and I will tell you this. My children went into, like, at 18 years old, I was out in the world. My kids were no more prepared at 18 years old to go off to college or anything else than the man in the moon, like than a baby, because I did everything for them. My mother didn't do my laundry when I was in high school. I did my own laundry. My mother didn't take me to a store and buy me clothes. I, babysat or had little jobs. Because I wanted to wear what I wanted to wear. I didn't want the pink dress. I wanted the jeans with the hip huggers and the fringe jackets and all of that went along with it. I probably would have spent more time dealing with family situations, because when you're younger, you just think you have all the time in the world. And especially for people in my family, I have a niece who's 20 years younger than me. I remember like not going to her dance recital when she was 4 years old, because to this day, I can't even tell you what show I was doing. But I know it mattered to her at the time that I did not go to her dance.
And do you have any regrets, or did you make the right choice for you?
I think I don't have regrets over all of the traveling I did, because living in a place like the United States of America, where we think the entire universe revolves around us and everyone is like us and understands our culture and our social structure, I'm thankful that I would go to a place like Japan and see how they treat elderly people compared to the way we do. I was happy to go to other places to see how the families all went on vacation together. They all, went everywhere together. It wasn't, oh, I'm going off with my friends and we're going off with our friends. So I'm glad I got exposed to that. I don't take for granted the fact that we have certain freedoms here, but I don't necessarily know that those freedoms serve us well sometimes. I feel that the kids today are less engaged in being children, and even teenagers. I feel like they have a heavy burden, even though I lived through a period of time where older brothers of friends of mine and whatnot were going to war. I still never went to school feeling like someone might come in and shoot us all. I never had to do a drill where they locked us in and we had to hide under our desks. I never had the pressure of anything but my little group of friends. And we all grew up with kind of the same culture and families. And yeah, there were people who were bullies, and there were people who were the smart kids, and there were people who were the funny kids and whatnot. But they have so opened up a can of worms with being online, coming into being exposed to things that I never even would have thought about being exposed to at 13 years old, 12 years old, 8 years old. I have now a grandson. He's a step grandson, but my son is marrying a woman who has 2 little boys. The 8-year-old said to me, I'm LGBTQ. And I said to him, Max, do you even know what that means? He said, I just don't identify as anyone. He goes, I don't think I'm a girl or I'm a boy. And I said to him, you know what? I'm not saying that's okay or not okay. That's not my call. But what I'm saying is this is something that you shouldn't even have to be worrying about now. And he said to me, well, you know, I like to wear like a rainbow shirt at school. And the kids were teasing me about wearing a rainbow shirt. And to me, that, you know, at that age, at 11 years old, I was just worried about like watching Saturday morning cartoons.
Wow.
Or going to the local pool to go swimming with my friends, or maybe going to the mall when I got a little bit older and hanging out with the kids there. We never thought about anything like that or worried about how other people were perceiving us. And I think that's what social media has done. I think it has really made people of a younger generation who are so easily influenced worry about things that they shouldn't have to worry about and how other people think of them.
To ask you, what would be your recommendations, or you have your moment here to talk to these kids, to talk to the parents, to talk to the teachers, from your experience, what you've lived and what you've seen and you see today? What would you tell the world to give some hope?
I think that friends and family are the core of everything good. And I don't care if you get along with them all the time, or if they do certain things that you don't like all the time, or that they don't necessarily love you all the time, but you will never, ever get that time back. And that is the basis for all of your values in this world. The biggest influence to this day is, as I've met thousands and thousands of people and musicians and record executives and people on crews and whatnot, those people that start you out in your life have more influence as time goes on than anything else you're ever going to be exposed to. And I think family is so important. You need to spend time with your family. Not that you always want to. I remember my mom dragging me to church, and I'm like, I don't want to sit in church with you. But now I look back on it and I'm like, oh, now I understand why.
And also the family you choose. Sometimes it's like, I have an acquired family because I come from Spain. So I made a family from the people in my community that are around me, from my husband's family that live upstate New York. So I think that that's also important. And take care
Absolutely.
of those people, right?
Absolutely.
And keep your kids off social media as much as you can.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. That is so important. You know, I get it. I can see the addiction of it and I can see the excitement of it because it's instant gratification. But I have to tell you, at one point, my brother said to me, do you remember we would wait all year to watch The Wizard of Oz on television? And I said, yeah, and we would get so excited when it would be like, today's the day, The Wizard of Oz is coming. He said, I have watched it 18 times in the last 2 days because my son just keeps playing it over and over and over again. And he said, they don't have to wait for anything. There's no anticipation. And because of there's no anticipation, he says, I feel like the results are, it's not as satisfying.
It's not as satisfying. One last thing before we end here. I know that you had a little, like a teenager from Spain come over with you a couple of years ago. How was that experience, like 2 years ago, having a 14-year-old in your house? How was it different from the American kids?
It was shocking to me. It was shocking. First of all, the respect that they had. I mean, they would call his mom and say, I love you. We miss you. We're having a great time. But, you know, respect for their siblings, respect for the people in their community, and just a connection that was so unbelievable to me. The bond that they all had with their families and their towns. And, you know, one boy was from Barcelona, so it wasn't like it was, you know, a little tiny village. But still, he would talk about his schoolmates and how they all would go, like one person would have a birthday party. Everyone goes to the birthday party. It's not like I choose you to come and I choose you to come. It wasn't even a question. It was just everybody goes. He was so sweet. He was so amazed at certain things here. But I know that he did not want to go home. But I understand why. Because here it was like he was living in a hotel. And I demanded nothing of him. Where when he first came here, he said to me, you need to tell me when I take a shower. You need to tell me when you want me to come to dinner. You need to let me know. He would constantly say to me, "Can I help you? Is there something I can do? Do you want me to, clean the dishes?" My own kids would be like, "When's dinner?" And just sit down at the table.
That's a cultural thing. Culture and family are very important in Spain, in some of these countries. Thank you, Paula. Was amazing. You took us through different decades, different cultures, childhoods. Your wild, exceptional adventure, you were like a audio engineer, and we love it. And thank you for all of this and for your
Well, thank
advice
you
to
for having me. It was
the
so good
kids
to
today.
meet you, and I look forward to seeing your broadcast so I can catch up on what other people in this world have to say as well.
Thank you very much, Paula. And
Take care.
remember, if you have any comments, you want to contact Paula, you want to share part of your upbringing in some of these cultures, just put it in comments, contact us, and you can also be a guest. Don't forget to follow us on Crossing Cultures with Cristina Luna in YouTube and Spotify for now. We're going to keep expanding with these wonderful guests that we have. Thank you, Paula.
Thank you. Have a good day.